And now I would like to introduce our presenter. Amanda Sloan is a registered landscape architect and has worked for more than 22 years to bring beauty as well as function to the design of parks, trails, and landscapes throughout New England. Amanda brings a wide-ranging skill set to her landscape designs, including a background in natural science, community design, and art. These skills have produced award-winning projects such as school and playground gardens, lakeside parks, recreation sites, rain gardens, and residential landscapes. Amanda is currently a landscape architect with New England-based Beta Group, where she specializes in rain garden design and native plants. Amanda is also a trustee on the Ecological Landscape Alliance Board of Directors. Welcome, Amanda.
Well, hello, and welcome everybody this afternoon. I really look forward to presenting this to you and to having a discussion afterwards. So without further ado, I'll get going. The seminar is Designing Successful Rain Gardens for Civic Sites. So we're going to be talking about not rain gardens at houses and residential rain gardens, but public landscapes, municipal, or any landscape where the public can wander by. And there's my my information, the groups I'm affiliated with. So as I said, we're going to be talking specifically about rain gardens for civic sites, and I've listed down on the left-hand side there some of the kinds of facilities that these rain gardens are just wonderful for. And in the pictures you see a rain garden that I designed. It's just a little park on the corner. This is Central Falls, Rhode Island, but it was we could integrate it into a bunch of different purposes for that park. On the top photo you see the river. So it was a river overlook. There was a bridge right next to it, and you can see the sign that says "Welcome to Chocolateville." They were developing a little museum there for I think it was America's first chocolate mill was right across the street. They also had a veterans memorial there and some interpretive signage, and so the rain garden was just integrated very nicely into this. It just looks like flowers in the park, but it's also accepting stormwater. And so these smaller kind of civic rain gardens really integrate well into these civic sites. So if you are someone who is designing a civic rain garden, or you want to implement one with your group, say you're a member of a library trustee board or a museum board, something like that, the first thing, the most important thing is going to be educating the group. I've found that although the term rain garden is very well known in the landscape community, a lot of people still don't know what a rain garden is and why you should build one. So what's also great about these civic rain gardens is that it's an opportunity to educate people about what rain gardens are. And there you see just a little presentation. It can be as simple as a PowerPoint presentation with a group from your the organization that's installing the rain garden. These are, I'm just suggesting some phrases you can use to explain what a rain garden is. You can say, when it rains, these gardens catch, cleanse, and filter stormwater back into the ground. And you may also need to explain the concept of an aquifer, because a lot of people don't understand what that is either. But of course, the aquifer is the underground place where water is stored, and when we drill a well, that's the water that we tap. So rain gardens will return water back into these important aquifers. Also, in more technical circles, a rain garden is called a bioswale, but the two terms are really interchangeable. And you can say that rain gardens help to solve particular problems of today. All you have to do these days is turn on the news or read a newspaper, if you still do that, if you're an older type like I am, and you'll see the reasons why rain gardens are important. Drought. Not so much in the Northeast, although we do have drought in the Northeast, but the stories of the fires in California are in the news every day, and what we also learn is that the big, huge aquifer out west there is being seriously depleted. Aquifers everywhere are being depleted. Here in the Northeast, and I'm sure all over the country, any town that pumps its water from a well often in the summer will have water restrictions because the wells start to run dry or they get very low. And so this concept of catching the storm water and returning it to the aquifer rather than have it run down into a storm drain is something that people can understand. And you can ask, if it's raining outside, ask people to take a look at the parking lot or the roof that rain is falling on, and think about where all that rain is going. Sometimes it's puddling in very inconvenient places, but usually it's going down a storm drain, and those storm drains pipe the water into our rivers, into our bays, when we could use a rain garden to return the water to the aquifers. So these are all concepts that civic groups can usually understand very well. You can introduce the concept that a rain garden is a bowl-shaped garden rather than a mounded garden. People are used to seeing gardens that are bermed up just a little bit with mulch. That's been the traditional way to do a garden. But if you ask them to kind of just turn that thinking upside down and think about a bowl-shaped garden that's planted the same way, mulched the same way, and you can use the same kind of things that you would use in any garden, fence, an arbor, sculpture, bird bath, but it's bowl-shaped instead of mounded. One of the misconceptions that I've run into is that people think, if they don't know anything about it, they think a rain garden is a water garden. They think of it as a pond. And actually, a rain garden is not a pond, although it is a garden that catches water. It's not a pond or a water feature. So that's a misconception that you can correct. People will often think of the old detention ponds or retention ponds that sometimes you see in neighborhoods with a fence around them. And it's not that either, because those usually have a clay bottom or a weir to when the water runs over a little bit. But a rain garden infiltrates the water down through the bottom, so it's none of those things. And here just is showing how fast that water really does dry up. Even I was surprised when I started making rain gardens how fast the water first fills and then disappears. And here, this is the same rain garden, two views of it. And you can see this one has actually been built around an old drain. That drain serves as sort of the relief valve if the rain garden were ever to get too full. I don't think it ever has. But it looks like a pond when it fills up, but very soon that water is all gone. People will ask, doesn't a rain garden attract mosquitoes? And you can reassure them that it doesn't, for that very reason, that the water drains out too fast. The little mosquito babies just couldn't live in that kind of environment. And so how large can they be? Well, they can be very small or very large, as you can see in these images. And they can really be put almost anywhere, in the inner city, in suburbs, out in the country. Here you see on the upper right, that's a rain garden in a housing community in the middle of the city. You see two samples of rain gardens in parking lots there, and we'll talk more about the way those were designed later. Another great feature of rain gardens is that the kind of plants you put in them they make a great habitat, and they attract pollinators, which is a very big issue these days, and a lot of people are hearing about that in the news also. So bees, butterflies, all those important pollinator animals can be supported by rain gardens. So now that we've kind of gone over the way to approach presenting a rain garden to a civic group, we can put on our designer hats and our technical hats and dig a little more deeply, so to speak, into how they're designed. And if you're someone who's overseeing construction of a rain garden or designing one yourself, or on a committee that's overseeing a rain garden, what are some of the things you should be looking for in the design and as the construction goes through, and then once it's finished, how to maintain it. So this is a really important slide, and we'll linger for a short while on it, and I'm going to try to use my cursor to point at a few things. It's a section through a rain garden. This is a simple rain garden, and most rain gardens really should look like this when you cut right down through them. So starting over here on the left, this is a rain garden that's going to be accepting storm water from a non-porous pavement. This might be a big parking lot, it could be a driveway, it could be any large section of non-porous pavement. And we first use a 4-bay for all of our rain gardens. In most of the state stormwater guidance manuals now, they do call for a 4-bay. In a residential setting, a rain garden might be more of just an informal depression in the ground, but for a civic garden where it really is a public place, you want to make sure that it includes all of these technical details that will make it work properly. So the 4-bay consists of a gravel trench and a strip of, usually it can be grass. I have started using sedges, and we'll talk more about that later, just to bring in that native plant aspect. The trench can be maybe 18 inches wide and 18 inches deep, but as we'll see in subsequent slides, you can shape it artistically. The reason to have that is to catch any of the large trash that's carried in with the rain into the rain garden, and it serves as sort of a first filtration. The grass strip is more of a finer first filtration. It catches silt and smaller pieces of trash, and it's sloped down very slightly. And then you see the rain garden itself. We've got a ponding area, or what we call the freeboard. Often that's about 8 inches, but it can be as little as 6 and as much as 12. It's a sort of dish-shaped excavation. We have a 3-inch layer of mulch, and that's very fine aged mulch, bark mulch. And then we have 12 inches of special planting medium. And this is a specially mixed medium. It's not just your normal planting soil. It's something that you need to give actually a recipe to a quarry or a soil specialist to mix for you for the rain garden. And you can see that the plants are all deep-rooted plants. I use all native plants in my rain gardens. And this kind of shows how the water filters down. You usually will put the filtration medium or the planting medium on undisturbed soil. You can, if your engineering calculations show that you need a larger storage capacity, you can put a foot or two of gravel under that. And I like to use decorative boulders clustered just in small areas around the edge of my rain gardens, because since they sink down into the earth, they can be not as noticeable as a mounded up garden, and a boulder or some other sculptural element lends a little more presence to the garden. So those are the layers of a rain garden. And once again, we see this slide of the ponding. You can see the water reflecting in there. But it goes away really fast. And there's a dry rain garden. This is pretty much a brand new rain garden, but it's functioning already. So if you're either creating some construction drawings for a rain garden, or say you're on a planning board and you're being presented with construction drawings for rain gardens, there are some aspects for these public civic gardens that really are necessary for you to see on the plans. And I have two examples here. I'll just show you this one quickly. One, of course, is a layout plan for the garden itself. One is going to be a section through the rain garden, and you'll see the section line A prime in the layout plan there, and that's going to be labeled with the different layers that we just talked about. That's so the contractor really knows what they're doing and what the different depths are, what the different materials are. On the upper right, you see that little recipe for the planting medium. This just happens to be the recipe that I use. There are a bunch of different ones out there, but the most important thing to notice is that it's mostly sand, believe it or not. There's a little bit of silt, much less clay or no clay if possible. Sand is really what you need to use for this, and then after this is mixed, you mix in a little bit of aged compost too to give the plants just a little nutrition. But it's funny, when I have the filter medium delivered to rain garden sites, the contractors will usually just stare at it and say, gosh, that looks like all sand, because it really is mostly sand. That really is what helps the rain garden filter the stormwater best, and sand also binds pollutants much better than many other media. You have your sizing notes, which we'll talk about a little bit later. That's very important. And then just your general planting notes over on the left there, and we'll talk about what those contain. Here's another one. It's maybe a little bit more readable. If you're, I actually have a section of materials quantities here. This is a rain garden that was being, parts of it were being donated, and so if you're sending a sheet like this out to different suppliers, it's always nice to have your quantities calculated. And we'll just look a little closer at some of these elements. Here's the layout plan. And you've called out the different areas and the different materials, and you would have also called out the dimensions on this one. There's the section through the garden. Really helps the contractor to visualize what they're doing. And here's the plant schedule, another really important part. You've got your list of plants on the right, and you've got your plant layout on the left. And as I mentioned earlier, I used all native plants. Actually, for all my gardens, I use all native plants, but for the rain gardens especially, the range of colors and forms and heights in native plants is just wonderful and remarkable, and you can make as beautiful a garden as you want with native plants. It doesn't have to be wild or messy looking if you choose your plants and your colors carefully. Um, the thing about a rain garden is that because it is mostly dry and every once in a while very wet, you need to choose your plants carefully because they need to be able to withstand short periods of inundation, having their roots completely underwater, and then long periods of dryness. It might be, a month or more of dryness. Because once the garden is established, you do irrigate to establish the plants, but once it's established, the only way those plants are going to get water is if there's a storm. So I find that you end up choosing plants that you would often just see growing by the roadside, the goldenrods, the asters, that sort of thing. And here are images of some of those plants. You can use shrubs, you can use small trees. These plants are all New England plants, but there are appropriate plants in any part of the country for rain gardens. But the common characteristic of all of these is that they can withstand short periods of inundation and long periods of dryness if they have to. Here is a really important aspect. It's the sizing. You have to remember that a civic rain garden is a stormwater practice. It's beautiful, it touches our hearts, but it's also an engineered thing. And so it's got to be sized properly. And so you need to see on the plan some kind of evidence that someone's been brought in to properly calculate the amount of stormwater that the rain garden is going to accept. And in this slide you see a little hand-drawn plan of a rain garden we'll see later on in the show. But you can see there's a parking lot. The rain garden is adjacent to a parking lot and also adjacent to a building roof, that Sharon Historical Society headquarters. And so I went in and actually calculated the area for, a certain number of year storm, and calculated the amount of rain that would be coming into the garden at once, and then I calculated the size. There are online tools you can use to calculate this, but I would strongly advise bringing in a professional if you're doing a rain garden like this. It could be a professional who's volunteering on your board. It doesn't have to be someone you hire, but you really need a landscape architect or an engineer who knows what they're doing, because there are instances of rain gardens that overflow because they have not been sized correctly. And some of the issues that have to be checked are taking a look at the soil. Did someone dig a test pit and see what's down there? Does it actually perk? Is there a slab of clay maybe, or you might be right over ledge, and the filtration rate might be very, very slow. Often in a town center or near a sidewalk, there are going to be underground utilities you have to know about. I have heard of instances where rain gardens were dug near underground springs that nobody knew about, and the rain garden completely failed. So you need to know about those things. And then also, if you're working in a town center that has a drain system already, you can sometimes connect your rain garden with those drains so that if you need to do a smaller rain garden and you do expect it to overflow every once in a while, the existing drains can accept that overflow. But you need to coordinate that with an engineer. So this is sort of a caveat, not to just go out there and do it yourself unless you have this kind of expertise at your fingertips. So we'll look a little bit closer at images of some of these rain garden elements. Here's the forebay, and I always do, my company always does a gravel forebay with a grass or a sedge strip. You can see down on the bottom left there, that was one of the first experiments in using sedge for a strip, and that's Pennsylvania sedge. The rain garden is brand new there, so, and of course sedge comes in clumps, so we've planted it in plugs there and hope that it will spread and really work the same way as grass. On the right-hand side, you can see a more conventional forebay with gravel and then just lawn grass. That was actually grown from seed, that lawn grass there. However, sod is actually even more recommended than seed because it works immediately. We're going to see a slide of what happens if you seed your forebay in a few images. And there's a forebay all ready to go. You've got that's right in the middle of a parking lot, and you can see the gravel strip, and then that is actually a sodded grass strip after that. Here's an example of a forebay in a parking lot island. And this parking lot actually is stepped down just a little bit. So on the left is a little bit higher than on the right. And the parking lot section on the left is going to just drain right into that island there. But it's got the forebay to catch the garbage and the silt that might be coming in. So in the past, when we first started doing rain gardens, we would see a lot of details that showed some kind of a permeable liner at the bottom of the rain garden. What they found is that those just clog up the garden. So those are not recommended, and you can see here, it's an example of a contractor just not being familiar enough yet with what they should do. This contractor had put a liner in this at the bottom of this forebay strip, and I had to have him take the whole thing out. Unfortunately, liners are not recommended. So if you see that on a detail, you should take it out. Okay, now, so say you have a rain garden being constructed and you're down there reviewing it, what should you look for? Well, here you see two rain gardens that have been excavated and they're all ready to be planted. And so it's really important that that soil that's going to be infiltrating the water not get compacted. So be sure that the contractor has roped off or taped off the site so that nobody steps in there. And on the right, you see how this contractor has been sweeping the silt away from the edge of the garden during the entire process of constructing this garden. He was out there every half hour with his broom, just getting that silt away so that it doesn't clog up the garden before we've even got the garden launched. And here is a beautiful example of a rain garden that the hardscape is all constructed here. Just gorgeously done. You can see the gravel forebay on the left that will accept the water that's going to be draining off the parking lot. And you can see that the forebay extends to the corner of the building. There's going to be a rain chain there so that rain can come off the roof also. You can see that the area where the sod or seed for the grass is going is all smooth. This is really beautiful, and I'll just give this contractor a plug because he did this for free. It's Yard and a Half Landscape Cooperative. They're a contractor out of Waltham, Massachusetts, and they're really, really good at this. So anyone in the Boston area, give them a call if you need a rain garden constructed. And here we have a look at that planting medium. This rain garden hasn't been mulched, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. There is a controversy over mulching rain gardens, but it gives you a really good look at the planting medium, and you can see how sandy that is. And here's just another look at that planting medium recipe. And I just want to say this is not proprietary. You can find these recipes online. You can often find them in your state stormwater guidance manual, or sometimes in your highway manual for your state. So a couple of other things, as I mentioned, contractors are still gaining understanding, and sometimes you really do need to explain things. On the left is that rain garden that had the liner put in it. The other thing that was done wrong there is that they separated the materials with a strip of metal edging. And the problem is, so what they've done is separated the gravel forebay from the filter medium. So basically what that's going to do is stop the water from going in there. So that had to be taken out also. On the right, you see the correct way to do this when you're constructing the garden. If you need to butt up your gravel with your planting medium, say you don't have a grass filter strip right in that area, what you can do is drive in some stakes, bend a board, fill the side that needs the gravel with gravel, fill the other side with your planting medium, and then just pull your boards and your stakes out, and everything stays exactly where it should go. Some other things to look for if you're doing a rain garden in an island in a parking lot. This is information that comes from out west, Washington State. They've found that often the little curb cut entries that are placed to accept the stormwater into the island are not big enough. And so what happens is the stormwater actually just shoots right past the rain garden without going in. So they're recommending now that you make your curb cuts long enough so that, and also grade your parking lot so that it really guides the stormwater right into where it's supposed to go. And here's another way to treat a parking lot island. You can see there that the parking lot slopes down just a little bit, and so the concrete edge at the back is actually flush, and that's the edge that accepts the stormwater. It's just cascading right over, and you can see the gravel forebay there. And on the other end, your curb pops up to stop the water from continuing down. And this is just sort of a classic misunderstanding that can happen. It did happen to me several years ago, and I don't think this would happen anymore, but this was when we were first getting started with rain gardens. And here's a beautiful rain garden this is public housing. And I didn't design or build this one, but I was charged with going down to sign off and make sure that everything was working properly. Luckily, when I went there that day, a storm was threatening, and so I just waited for the storm to happen, and it was torrential. And what happened was that the parking lot flooded up, but they had graded the rain garden such that it was above the parking lot. So the storm water would have had to flow uphill to get into the rain garden. And those are the kinds of mistakes that you can catch. Hopefully you don't have to catch too many more of these kinds of mistakes, but it's the kind of thing you should, maybe squat down and eye the ground a little bit and just make sure that this sort of thing isn't going on. We were able to correct this by cutting some channels so that the water could reach the rain garden. Here's another little problem. This is that Historical Society rain garden again, and this is where we were intending to seed in the grass strip and just hadn't quite done it yet when there was a torrential storm. And so you can see that where the garden is brand new and things haven't really settled yet, you can get a lot of rilling going on, and that needs to be repaired because that'll silt your garden up right away. So you should make sure that your the edge of your garden is very level all the way around. I'm recommending using sod rather than seed if rain is threatened. Or you can see there are some larger stones. See if I can use my arrow right here, sort of a little check dam to stop the rain from coming in so fast while the grass grows in the grass strip. And then on to maintenance, which, if you're doing a civic rain garden, the first question you're going to be asked by the group is, how are we going to maintain this? Or, if it's a rain garden for a town, it's the poor DPW people who are the ones who, they're going to get one more garden that they have to maintain. And so a lot of times that's the first question you're going to be asked. And a lot of rain gardens just haven't been around long enough now for us to really go deep into years and years of maintenance. But this is how I approach it. I'll tell the group that maintenance compares favorably in cost and time with maintaining conventional storm drains, and that's absolutely true. It's cheaper, actually, to maintain a rain garden than it is to be dredging out those storm drains all the time. It's really similar to just maintaining a regular garden. It's just a bowl-shaped garden rather than one that's bermed up a little bit. You will get a question if you're in a place in the country where there's snow. You'll get a question about snow. And what we found here in the Northeast, and I know that in Minnesota, other very cold places, they found that rain gardens work great. It has something to do with the fact that the earth stays warmer than the air, and actually if you watch snow melt on the side of the road, you'll notice that it's the bottom snow that always melts first, and the water is always flowing under the top crust of snow. And so you can kind of picture what happens with a rain garden. However, rain gardens should never be used as snow storage areas, and that's just because that stored snow usually has a lot of pollutants in it. There's a lot of garbage in there, there's salt, and a rain garden just can't clean that well. So avoid using a rain garden if it's a snow storage area that you're also looking for there. So for the particular parts of the rain garden for maintenance, the forebay, you can rake it out, you can pick up the garbage. If your municipality has a silt vacuum, which is a piece of equipment that's being used more and more, purchased more and more now by localities, because a lot of places do have permeable pavements now, and the best way to get silt and things that will clog permeable pavement out is to actually use a pavement vacuum. And your forebay gravel strip can be vacuumed also. You can mow the grass strip. If it's sedge, you don't have to mow it. The sedge will only grow a certain height. The mulch should be refreshed as often as you might, refresh your mulch. Just be certain not to put fresh new mulch on your rain garden, because we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that can actually contribute to the pollutants, to nitrogen in the rain garden. The plants can be pruned just the same way as any garden, and if you plant closely enough in the rain garden, you should only need to weed when the plants are very small. They should just block out weeds once they get mature. The interesting thing is that planting medium, the filter medium, it seems from research they're doing out on the West Coast that can actually last up to 25 years. And that's 25 years of filtration and also binding the pollutants that are coming in with the stormwater. And just a few new trends in rain gardens to be aware of. This whole filter medium, planting medium, we touched on this a little bit before, but they're still experimenting with different mixes. A lot of the experimentation has to do with the kinds of pollutants that you're expecting in a particular rain garden. So if it's one that's draining a parking area, you're looking for some kind of minerals in your sand that will bind oils, greases, that sort of thing. If it's storm water coming off a roof, you might be looking for different kinds of things that will bind the pollutants coming off there. And this is, again, where professionals can help, and this is how we're sort of starting to refine rain gardens now. Out west, they're using oyster shells almost exclusively in some places. Apparently, the oyster shells just soak up those pollutants and bind them so they can't go anywhere. Biochar is being used, calcium-rich stones. So it's very, very interesting. Here's the whole mulch question. Apparently, on the West Coast, it's now being recommended not to use mulch at all. I know in several of the stormwater guidance manuals here on the East Coast, mulch is definitely mentioned as an important filtration ingredient for the rain garden. But the problem is when it decomposes. And so for now, I do use mulch, but I make sure that it's very well aged. And phytoremediation. What role can the plants that you're planting in the rain garden, what role can they play in actually soaking up some of these pollutants? It's something that's still being looked into, and I will put in just a little plug for a conference that ELA is having down in Pennsylvania in November. There's going to be an expert on phytoremediation speaking at that conference, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot about the latest in phytoremediation from her, so I invite people to sign up for that one. And now I just want to go very quickly through some examples of civic rain gardens and how they were built. I know we're getting close to 2 o'clock and I do want to take questions, so we'll just page quickly through these. So here's a museum, the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History, and this is their entry, which is very attractive, but they were looking for something to kind of punch it up a little bit and also an educational opportunity. And they did want to put in a rain garden. So we located a place right inside the fence there where we could put one. And the first thing I like to do, just for sort of publicity purposes and to really sell the project to the group, is come up with a nice color plan of what it's going to look like. And of course, this is, as if you were flying over the facility in an airplane and looking straight down. There's a little bit of symbolism in it, but once you learn how to read it, it becomes obvious. And so on the right, you see in the oval a color representation of what this rain garden is going to look like, and then you see over the building roof, there's a blow up of that, just to show people how colorful it's going to be. And here we are building this garden. It's always a job for a machine, excavating for a rain garden. This particular one, there were some archaeological concerns in that location, and the museum actually had an archaeology team and connections with our state archaeology office, and so they were able to go in there and do an excavation with children beforehand and make that a museum activity. They did find some artifacts, and they have a little exhibit inside the museum now. Those are the kinds of educational activities that can be brought into these civic projects. There we're receiving the filtration medium, the planting medium, and you can see how sandy it is. The boulders are being placed, and that planting medium is just waiting to be spread out in the bowl. And now it has been, and that garden is all ready to be planted. We received donations of plants for this one, and they've all been placed. And then we had a museum planting day. We invited people to come in and plant a plant in the rain garden, and here's our crew doing just that. And there's the result. And that's another view of the result. And I want you to just take a look at that boulder in the back underneath the sign. You can see sort of a black hole in it. What I like to do with these rain gardens is really make them more than just an engineering technical thing. I like to try to connect them with their site somehow. And when we received our boulders, we noticed that one of them had this blast hole in it. And of course, I was scratching my head and pacing around and going, oh my gosh, you know, we're going to have to bury that hole. And the contractor took a look at it and he said, no, no, no. He said, this is a rain garden for children. That's a spyglass. And I said, oh my gosh, you're right. And so we placed that boulder so that when you look through it, you can see one of the beautiful plants that we have growing in the garden. And in our interpretive signage for the garden, you can see up on the right, there's a little poem that we wrote. It's a little key, a little teaser for kids to read to see if they can find where that spyglass is. So it makes the garden more meaningful than just a rain garden. Here's another one at a church, St. Charles Borromeo Church, a beautiful historic church in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. In the photo on the right, you can see to the back of the church, there's a big sloping roof coming down, and under that is a perfect place for a rain garden. And so, you know, once again, I did the color presentation plan, and I decided that this was going to be an all-white garden. It's native plants, but they're all white, and the reason for that is that St. Charles Borromeo's creed was humility, and the color for humility is white. So once again, it's a way to sort of connect the garden with its site. There are all your white plants, your white native plants. And here we are building that garden. And there it is. You can see that the father and his helpers up on the right there, they love this garden and they love coming out to check it. And on the bottom, you can see that we're attracting pollinators. And then the last one is one you've seen images of in this presentation, the Sharon Historical Society, with this big parking lot right next to it and a big roof and a school in town that was looking to do something great for the town center. They were studying water that year, water around the world, and they decided to do a rain garden. And so this site was chosen. This is another thing you can do with these civic rain gardens is you can turn them into educational opportunities. Here you see one of the girls at the school presenting her plan. On the left is one of the plans for the garden. Each girl did a plan, and on the bottom they each did an actual model of the rain garden so they could understand about the gravel forebay and the grass strip and the planting. The girls did an actual community meeting with the members of the Historical Society, such an important part of any civic landscape, and the girls learned how to do that. And then we came up with this plan. We pulled together all of their different ideas. We pulled together this plan, and then once yard and a half had gone in and actually excavated the garden, which you see up at the top there, the top left, the students actually planted the plants. And there they are. This is an Orthodox Jewish girls' school, so they were all wearing long skirts, but that didn't stop them from planting. And that's how it looks. It's still new. It hasn't been mowed yet, but very bright and beautiful. and they also created a sign all by themselves for the garden. So it's an educational opportunity for them, for anyone who's walking by. And on the upper left, you see the rain chain they installed, and on the upper right, how a rain chain works, in case anyone needs to see that. And that's the end of the presentation. This is my contact information.
Thank you, Amanda. That was fabulous, wonderful, lots of information for us to digest. We do have several questions, and we'll try to get through them as quickly as we can since we're coming up on the 1 hour time limit. The first question is, can you give us a little bit more information about your choice of plants for rain gardens, or can you refer our listeners to resources that they could refer to?
Absolutely. Well, so I did talk about the fact that it's nice to use native plants in a rain garden, and you want to use plants with long roots that will help to filter the water and help to keep the filtration medium friable, not compacted. Depending on where your rain garden is located, as I mentioned, you can use some of the smaller ornamental trees like amelanchier, or other small flowering trees, sort of forest edge trees like dogwood. You can use shrubs. You just don't want to use any larger plant that is going to create root problems in the garden. A big, like maybe a big oak tree probably would not be an appropriate choice for right smack next to a rain garden. So you want to use some plants that will grow tall enough, but not too tall, so people can see what's going on, and so you can go in there and maintain the garden if needed. There are a lot of sources online. If you just go in and Google rain garden plants, you're going to find so many lists, often for your part of the country. You can go to the website for Grow Native Massachusetts if you're on the East Coast, or any other native plant society. There is the New England Wildflower Society also here on the East Coast. That's just a very brief answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, this listener has read articles from ASLA on the cost benefits of bioswales. Have you done any review of those cost benefits yourself that could be shared with clients or municipalities?
I have not done that myself. I know that in general, the research has been done that bioswales, rain gardens are really cost effective. And so if I'm in a situation where I'm proposing a rain garden for a municipality that's maybe also considering a more conventional way to treat stormwater, I would just go right in and do a cost estimate for them for that particular situation. Because sometimes, the size of the rain garden can make a difference, the location, the kind of stormwater system that they have in place already, the kind of equipment they're using to clean it, and all of those things. So I can't give any general information off the cuff, but it is true that these bioswales are cost effective, and I think that information is probably readily available. If the listener finds anything interesting, I do invite them to contact me.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about the site prep for 4 bays. You mentioned specifically that they were 18 inches deep. Is there site prep below that, or do you only prep down the 18 inches?
For the 4 bay, you only need to prep down the 18 inches. and as you saw in many of my images, I'll often do a very curvilinear forebay, and that's fine. You just need to be sure the edge is level so that the stormwater that's running in doesn't create a rill, and if you curve the edge too much, you're going to also have the same problem, but you only need to go down 18 inches. It can be, you know, a little wider in places, a little narrower in places. It's kind of it's a rough way to pre-treat the stormwater.
Okay.
And then the gravel goes right on the on undisturbed earth there.
Okay, thank you. So there are a few different questions specific to the plants. One of them is, you mentioned plugs are, do you recommend that plugs are adequate to start, since there are new deep plugs available from Nasami Farms and North Creek Nurseries, both have a lot of native plants?
That's a conditional yes. I actually, for most rain gardens, I would recommend going with a, you know, maybe a 1 gallon, 1 to 3 gallon perennial plant with a good root system. The plugs that I was mentioning earlier were for the forebay sedge, but I do worry still about plugs getting displaced when they're, even the more deep-rooted ones. If you have a big storm right after you install the garden and it fills right up to the top, things can start to float. So I would recommend that it's better to start with a full-size, you know, nursery-size plant. Certainly experiment with plugs. You know, we may find that they work fine in certain situations, and I think also the nurseries will start to prepare them for these stormwater practices, you know, like the deeper root plugs that are becoming available now.
Okay. The next question is also a planting material. Do you have recommendations other than turf or sedge to go up next to the forebay?
I think that this is an area where we can experiment. Anything that's low growing and sort of finely textured, that water can flow through and that will catch those finer pieces of matter that are in the stormwater, you know, silt and cigarettes and things like that, can be used. And you know, so probably not moss, but you know, maybe some of the shorter ferns could be used if it's in a shadier site. Any, you know, with the finer ground cover. So and what's so exciting about this is that it really is an emerging technology. It's an emerging art, I should say, designing rain gardens. So I encourage experimentation, and if somebody finds something great, you know, once again, please let me know. I'd love to know about it.
Okay. The next question is, in one of your illustrations, the rain garden in Cape Cod had no mulch. Was that a design choice?
Actually, I think that we showed the rain garden before it was mulched. There was one rain garden I showed which had a very sandy look to it, and that was the one that actually, it was an early rain garden design from several years ago. That was one that I actually did not design. That was the one that I was checking. That did not have mulch on it, and it was still sort of in process, so I don't know if they put mulch on it afterwards, but if I showed an image without mulch, it's just because we hadn't put the mulch on it yet. I do still mulch all my rain gardens. I just try to make sure that mulch is aged so that, you know, its main purpose is for filtration. We just don't want it to be contributing any nutrients to the water that's going down into the aquifer.
Okay. We have a few more questions we're going to try to get to. How do you handle overflow? Do you always need some sort of drain or standpipe?
Yeah, I often get this question, and it's very interesting. I have never run into that problem with any of the rain gardens I've done. And it's really, I think it's mostly because the rain gardens that I do usually are right next to more of a natural landscape. So, the filtration is readily available. Also, I just want to emphasize so much that it's really important to properly size them. And I think if you properly size your garden, you're even with a huge 100-year storm, you're just not going to have a problem. However, if you're putting one in a sidewalk in the middle of the city and you do have a constrained area, you will need some kind of a relief system. And so you can tie it into the existing drain. You can put you can actually build a rain garden around an existing drain. You saw some images of that in this presentation. But you should work in conjunction with an engineer to make sure you do that properly. You can, put an under drain system that's connected with the pipes that are going down the side of the road. Those are all options.
Okay. Are any of the gardens that you've installed, do you have sources for certified organic plants this listener is interested in that are also pesticide free and have no neonic contamination?
I do. I would invite people with those questions to contact me at the email address that you see on the screen right now, and I can send a list. I would want to know what area of the country they're looking for and that sort of thing. And it's really hard nowadays to be certain about this whole neonic thing. So it can be a bit of a questionable that sometimes you need to do very personal research on that. But yeah, I encourage people to contact me for more plant discussion, definitely.
Okay. And this next question is about contaminants, specifically road salt. Is there some technique for keeping the road salt out of the gardens, or planting salt tolerant?
Yes. So there are certain ways you can tailor your planting medium to attenuate the salt. And once again, for more specific discussion of that, because I have the names of different minerals kind of whirling around in my head right now. I don't want to give any incorrect information, but that you can mix your planting medium accordingly. You can use salt-tolerant plants, but if you think that you should not locate a rain garden in a place where, for instance, as I said, a snow storage area where there's just going to be so much salt, it's ridiculous. Certainly by the side of a road is fine if you think that there's going to be some road salt tossed in. We're doing that all the time. And using salt-tolerant plants is a very good idea.
Okay. The next is about DIY. We've had a few questions about this. If individuals are able to find local sources for the mixes that you're talking about to have a rain garden mix prepared for them, is there any reason why they couldn't attempt these projects on their own at a small residential scale?
There isn't any reason why not. And I do use these these plans for residential rain gardens. However, I am going to just tell a little story, a quick story as a caution. So I had worked with a contractor that does mostly residential work on a Civic rain garden, and he took my rain garden design and interpreted it on his own for a residential rain garden that he was, a client had asked for a rain garden in her backyard. And he said, okay, but he did not do the sizing calculations. And he did everything else, but he didn't size it. And a couple of weeks after the rain garden was done, I got a phone call, and he said, Amanda, I've got a problem. I have to admit, I used your rain garden design for this residential client, and there's a big problem. The rain garden is flooding. We don't know where the water's coming from. It's, I put the planting medium in, and it's all sand, but there's still water coming up. And I said, oh, it was a few towns away, and I said, you're going to have to call the town engineer to find out what's going on. I said, did you do any looking into what might be under there? No, he didn't. So it turned out, and that's why I put the whole in this, because it turns out there was a spring on her property that was bubbling up, and it found its way into the rain garden. And not only that, but she was the lowest lying property in a neighborhood that was surrounding her that was all higher than she was, and she was getting stormwater not only from her own driveway, roof, and yard, but everyone else's in that neighborhood. And those are things, this was an area that the contractor didn't even think about. He just wasn't expertise in this area. So that's just a little cautionary story. You need to be aware of things outside your own property, because you're really talking about watersheds here. It's wonderful to do a residential rain garden, but just get advice if you think you're going to need it. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. We're going to let that be the last. As you can see, Amanda has shared her contact information. If you have additional information that you would like to share with the group, you can send it to ela.info@comcast.net, or if you have questions for Amanda, you can reach her at the contact slide shown. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing all of this great information with us. It certainly has been very valuable to all of us, and thank you all for attending. Good day and good gardening to you all.